In today's video, we are going to create the Angular components for login, logout, and register, as well as all of the wiring needed for our Angular application to communicate with our ASP.NET Core backend. Let's go. The first thing that we're going to do is delete the app-component.css and app-component-spec.ts files. Unfortunately, when you use the ASP.NET Core Angular template included in Visual Studio, the schematics for that force tests and external CSS, so we'll delete those. Next, we need to come into the app-component.ts and change the style URL in the component decorator to styles with an empty formatted string. Inside of our app-component.html, we'll take out the HTML there and just replace it with router outlet. Inside of the app-module.ts file, we need to import forms module and reactive forms module, and then add them into the imports collection. We need to go back to the server for just a second and open up the program.cs file. And between the app environment is development and app.use HTTPS redirection, we need to add cores to our pipeline. So I'll add app.use cores and then options, allow any header, allow any method, and allow any origin. For a production app, you might want to lock some of these down, but this will work for our demo. Next, I'll move over to the Developer PowerShell tab inside of Visual Studio, and I want to cd into Angular net core auth demo.client. I need to run several commands here. The first is npm install JWT-decode and npm install bootstrap. Next, I'll cd into source app. And I now want to start running some of the generate commands against ng to scaffold out our components. The command I'll run is ng gc pages/login --skip-test and --inline-style. This will create our login component inside of a pages directory, and the spec and CSS files will not be generated. Next is ng-gc pages register, also skip test and inline style. ng-gc pages logout, skip test and inline style. ng-gs shared services auth, skip test. ng environments. And let's go ahead and populate our environments files. Inside of environment.ts, we need production to be true and the API URL to be localhost, whatever port you're using, /API/. In the environment.development.ts file, production is false and the API URL is the same. Now back to the Developer PowerShell, I'll run ng interface shared/models/login model. And inside of the login model, we need two fields. First is email as a string and password as a string. And back to the console, I'll run ng interface shared/models/register model. And inside of the register model, we need email as a string, password as a string, confirm password as a string, and full name as a string. Once again in the console, I'll run ng interface shared/models/auth response model. If you recall, this will be responsible for delivering any messages to us from the server when it comes to login or registration. And in this model, I'll add three fields: result boolean, message string, and token string. Now I'll move over to the auth service. We need to import JWT decode from JWT-decode at the top of the file. At the top of the service, I'll add HTTP client equals inject HTTP client, and then add references to HTTP client and inject. Next, I'll add token key string equals AngularNet Core Auth Demo _ token. This will be the name of the key where the token is stored inside of local storage. Next, I'll add API URL string equals environment.api URL. And of course, add a reference to the environments. I'm going to get rid of the constructor because it's not really needed. And the first method I'll create is login. And login takes a single argument VM as login model. It's going to return an observable auth response model. And then inside of the body, return this.http.post, and we expect an auth response model, this.api URL, and then account/login. And we also need to pass VM, the login model, to the server. Next, I'll add .pipe, and inside of pipe, map. And map is going to move res, which is what we'll get back from the server. And if res.result is true, we'll use local storage.setItem this.token key to be res.token. And finally, we can return res. And then going back through the references, we need to add a reference to map, and we need to add a reference to auth response model, and login model, and observable. The next method I'll create is logout, and logout doesn't accept any arguments, and it returns nothing, so it's void. And we want to local storage.removeItem this.token key. Register is the next function. It will accept a VM of register model. And this method is going to return an observable auth response model. And inside of the body, return this.http.post auth response model as the type. And the URL will be a formatted string, this.api URL, and account/register. And we also will pass in VM. And we need to add a reference to register model. The next method will be private retrieve token, and it's going to return a string or null. And this is going to call return local storage.getItem this.token key, or null if it's not there. The next method is also going to be private, is token valid. And we'll pass in the token here whenever we're calling it. And it's going to return a Boolean. If token equals null, return false. And then I'll add const decoded token equals JWT decode and pass in token. Next, we need to test this token to make sure that it's still valid. If date.now is greater than decoded token exp times 1000. If at this point we find in local storage the token, but that token decoded is older than the expiration on the token, we want to log out to remove the token from local storage. So this.logout. Return false. Otherwise, if all of those tests pass, we can return true. Next, I'll add a method between register and the private methods, so that we can find out if we're logged in pretty easily. The method name is isLoggedIn, and it's going to return a Boolean. Const token equals this.retrieve token. If token is null, we'll return false. Otherwise, we'll return this.isTokenValid and pass in token. And we're done with the service. Next, let's start on the login component. So we want to grab a reference to form builder, FB form builder equals inject form builder, and then add references to form builder and inject. Auth service equals an inject auth service. And we also need a router. Next, I'm going to create a reactive form. So login form as form group equals this.fb group. The first field is email, and it's going to have an initial value of an empty string. And we also need an array of validators. The first validator is required, and the second is email. Next is password, and it also is going to have a default value of an empty string. And the validator array here will be validators.required and validators.minLength 8. Then we need to add references to the validators and a reference to form group. Next, I'll add the login method. The login method is going to create a login model. Email is this.login form.controls email.value, and password is this.login form.controls password.value. We'll then call this.authservice.login, pass in the login model, and subscribe. Next, we'll be taking in response, and if the response.result is true, we'll console.log login succeeded, and then navigate to /. We'll also handle error here, and we're just going to console.log login failed, and then console.log error. And then we need to update our imports to bring in login model and close. So next we're working on the UI for the login, and there is a lot here. I don't want to go through and name every class on every div, but I'll call out the important parts. And here's your friendly reminder to like and subscribe. We post new videos often for software developers, software engineers, and software architects. Thanks. First, the form. It has a bound form group property equals login form, and ng submit is set to login here. And then I have a row for the email, and there's a label here for email, and then there's an input for the email. And it's really important to get the form control name equals email here. The others don't matter nearly so much. I would add required. The ng class for the email field is somewhat important if you want really good looking forms. If you fail to have valid input inside of the email field, then the outline for it's going to be red, or whatever your is invalid class is set to. Also, inside of the class invalid feedback div, the different types, because we have two validators, there are two possible reasons that the field is invalid. On line 14, if the errors includes required, then it's going to have an email is required message. If you enter an invalid email, it'll be email is invalid. It all depends on how detailed you want to be. Next, I'll create another row for the password, and then create a label for password, and then the input. The input for password is going to be pretty much the same as the input for email, other than the type. The type will be changed. Instead of email, it'll be password. So the form control name is password, the name is password, the type is password. It's required, of course. The ng class for password is pretty much the same, only it references password instead of email. Again, if this field is not valid and it has been touched, then the outline will be red. And our error message is pretty simple. If the password errors includes required, it'll say password is required. And next, we'll create a button for submit and just have login as the text. I know this is a lot of UI code to type out. If you want to just grab it from the repo, it's included in the description. Next, we'll move to the register component. And you'll notice a pretty similar flow here. We need a form builder, and we need to add form builder and inject to our imports. We need an auth service, and we need a router. we want to create a register form. Form group equals this.fb.group. And this one, other than having a couple of more fields, looks pretty similar. Email will have an empty value to start out with, and then the validators array will be required and email. Password will also have an empty value as a default, and its validator array is the same as the login form. Required and minimum length of 8. Confirm password has a empty default value and the same validators as password. Required and min length 8. Full name has an empty default value and its validators are required and min length 3. And then we need to update our imports to include validators and form group. Next comes the register method. And we need to construct a register model. And of course, email is going to be set to this.registerform.controls email.value, password set to password, confirm password to confirm password, and full name to full name. Then we'll call this.authservice.register, pass in register model, and subscribe. Next inside of here will be taking in response, and if the response.result is true, we'll console.log registration succeeded, and then navigate to /login. And the error for the register method will just console.log registration failed, and then console log the error. Finally, we need to add a register model to our imports. This UI is going to look a whole lot like the login form. The form tag has form group equals register form and ng submit is register. And there's rows for each of the different fields inside of the form. Email, password, confirm password, and full name. The form controls, the inputs have form control name set to each of those properties. It also has the required flag on each field since they are all required. The ng class is set for the same types of properties to get that nice red border. And then the invalid feedback is set up pretty much the same as the login form. For the email field, you'll get different messages based off what is wrong inside of the validators. And the password field looks exactly like the password field in the login form. The form control name is password. It's required. The ng class is set up the same as the password in the login form. You should avoid typing all this out if you can possibly help it. The confirm password follows the same style. You could actually copy the password field, including the label, the entire row, and just update anywhere you see password to confirm password, except for the type. The type needs to remain password. Full name is also similar. The form control name, of course, is set to full name. It's required. The ng class is the same. Only it's looking at the full name values. The full name field also gets the double treatment for invalid feedback. If the errors is required, then full name is required. And if the errors is just full name, then it says it has to be at least 3 characters long. And our registration button is just type equals submit. And I see an error here. I copy pasted as well. The register form.get full name.errors full name on line 69. Okay, I think we're done in here. Next, let's move to logout. The logout component is much simpler than the others. We need to inject the auth service and update our imports. We also need to inject the router. And we're going to use ng on init to run this.authservice.logout and then router.navigate by URL /login. And of course, we need to implement on init and add that to our imports. And the UI for this component also is very simple. We'll just add a logging out message. That message should not even display really. We're not waiting for an asynchronous call. We're just clearing out local storage. Next, we're going to move into the app routing module TS file. And inside of the routes, I'm going to add 4 different routes. The first, path empty string, component login component, path match full. And you can pretty much guess the others. Path login component, path register component, and path logout component. And then of course we have to add each of these components to our imports. So let's run ng build to make sure we have no syntax errors. Mine compiled fine. Hopefully yours did. And let's finish the last few touches. We need to add bootstrap to our styles. So open up angular.json. And inside of the styles array, we want to add node underscore modules / bootstrap / dist / css / bootstrap.css. And one error I noticed as I ran off camera is inside of the auth service, the URLs for login and register were actually wrong. I needed to add an S to account, so accounts instead of account. One other thing that I noticed off camera, the button for my register form wasn't displaying correctly. I forgot to add a div. I want each of the form fields and the button to be on their own rows. So now we can start debugging. And we'll do the login first. And if you followed along with the previous videos, I created a user test@test.com with a password of TE$T1234 as the password. And if you're using the repo, that is the username and password as well. And I'll open up the debugger or the developer tools before logging in so I can see everything. And login did return a token. Result true, message login success. So that's pretty good. Next, I'll go to /register. And I want to create another new user, test2@test.com. And I'll use the same TE$T1234 as the password. And the full name's test user junior. And that also worked. The token, of course, is empty, but the result is true, and the message is account created. All right, so back in Visual Studio, I'll stop debugging, and I want to look at the users table inside of the auth.db. And you can see there's our test user junior, but the email confirmed flag for this user is not true. So I'm going to change that for the other account and this one, so that we can use it to log in. So I'll fire up the debugger once again. And fire up another incognito window. And go to localhost 4200. And you can see how the nice little classes if you mess up the form controls. And you'll notice here that inside of local storage, I do have the Angular Net Core Auth Demo token value in local storage. I want to delete that. And my email is test2@test.com and TE$T1234 as the password. Log in and you can see the token. And then finally log out. And you can see the token is deleted. Good deal. At this point, we have, I think, finished. In the future, I may add some enhancements. It would be nice to have a workflow for confirming the email. But all in all, I think we can call this done. Until next time, happy coding.